Hello, my name is Ryan Moore. I'm the president and founder of RyanNet Corporation and SilkScreeningSupplies.com. To start off, I'd like to say thank you very much for your interest in the screen printing process. Though screen printing is hundreds of years old, today it is more viable and faster growing than ever. Whether you're starting a small business from your home or running a large printing operation, the screen printing industry is fun, exciting, creative, and very lucrative to be a part of. This DVD is going to cover step-by-step the screen printing process. We're going to go over artwork creation, exposing your screens, setting up your job, all different types of printing, curing parameters, teardown, and cleanup. The one thing I really want to stress to you guys is that screen printing is variables. This DVD isn't going to cover every single little thing you need to know about the screen printing process. Through the years, we've gotten a lot of feedback from customers about the problems and situations they've gotten stuck in. We're going to try to incorporate as many of those into this DVD as possible. However, if you get stuck or have questions along the way, we're really there to help you via phone and email to get you up and going. You know, we're not only here to help you get started, but we're here to help you become successful. After all, your success is our finest accomplishment. So let's get started, have some fun, and get printing. The first thing that we're going to cover today is artwork. The one thing I want to make very clear to you is that artwork is going to make or break your screen print. If you start out or your customer gives you bad artwork, it's not going to look good on your t-shirt. We're going to cover basic artwork creation and how to color separate. So let's go over to the computer and get started. To create a basic text image, you're going to want to know that you're going to want to create your text or your whatever artwork you have. It's going to want to be a black image on a clear or a white background. So basically right now I'm going to go over and show you how to create a basic text design using Photoshop. Now, to create a text layer, all you have to do in Photoshop is come over here. This is your palette tool. Come over here and select the text tool, and then come over here to your palette and then start typing. Now let's say we're going to want to type the words US and A on a shirt, and we want the USA to be red, white, and blue. You can change the size of your image by coming up here and selecting different text sizes. Let's work with text size, maybe 100. So, let's say we have the USA word on our shirt. Now, to create USA in different colors on your screens, each one of these, if you want your U to be red, your S to be white, and your A to be blue, each one of these has to be on a different layer. Right now, they're all on the same layer. You can select and view your layers by using your Layers palette tool. It's usually in your lower right-hand corner of your screen. Now, as you see, all these right now are on the same layer. So I'm going to erase the S and the A, so that just leaves our first color, which is going to be our red. Now, this might confuse some of you, but for your beginners, you're always going to create a black image on your artwork program. So basically, you're creating a black image, and that will show you later how to transpose that onto your screen and to screen print that. So even though you're creating a black image here, you can print whatever color that you want through that screen. So if I talk about this U being red, I'm talking about it. I'm going to use red ink later on in the screen printing process. So let's go forward. To create a new layer, we come up here and we select our pointer tool, which basically clears that layer. Then we come here and select once again the type tool. Come back to our palette, just click once for a new layer, and then we have our S. Now when the layer is highlighted and when you see our little text tool being blinking there, we can come and move the text around wherever we want it. So let's position it next to the U where we want it. And then once again we're going to clear that layer by selecting the pointer tool, and then we're going to come here, select another text layer, and then A. So right now we have our U, we have our S, and we have our A on our clear or our white background. If you notice, each one of these text letters are on a separate layer. We can highlight and view each layer if we come over here to our Layers tool and highlight or unhighlight these eyeballs. Alright, let's just highlight the U. So we're going to unhighlight the S and the A. Then we just have our U. Now, if we want to move our U around, we either have to come to our layers palette and highlight that particular layer, or we can come here to our palette and right click on the U. It's going to bring up a selection tool. We're going to highlight the U, and then now we can move the U around. You can do the same to the S. To view the S, you click on the layer. If you want to move it, we either have to have the layer highlighted or come here and select it. Let's do that to this A. We're going to come here and we're going to right click on the A. That's going to bring up a selection tool. We're going to click the A, and now we can move it. Once we have our artwork positioned, we're going to have to create what's called registration marks on the artwork, so that when we go to the screen and we print it out onto the film, each one of these films is going to have registration marks on it. Now, registration marks gives your film and your screen some point of reference. So when you go to set your job up, each screen has registration marks on it in the same spot. So however complicated your artwork is going to be, even though this artwork right now is very, very simple, if we're going to get into more complicated artwork later, but if we have registration marks on the same spot in every piece of film, we're going to be able to set each screen up to registration marks, and each screen is going to register perfectly. So to add these registration marks, we simply come into Photoshop, and there's two ways to do it. Now, using different sizes of screen mesh is kind of dictate which kind of registration marks you're going to need to use. Now, this text design is a very, very big block text design. So we're going to print this with a 110 screen mesh. Your 110 screen mesh is a fairly open screen mesh, so it doesn't really pick up a lot of fine detail. So basically, for these larger text blocks image, we're going to use plus signs as registration marks. Basically, you're going to create a new text layer on your artwork and add 3 to 4 plus signs with your artwork around the edge or perimeter of your artwork. Now, once we have the plus signs in position, we're going to want to keep them always the same spot on the screen so we don't move them around. So when you go to print each layer, because as once again we want to print one layer at a time, so that we have a very, very good and color separated image when we go to screen print it. So when we print each layer, we want the registration marks in the same spot. We go to print the U. Basically, when you're going to print the U, you come and you highlight the U. So all you have is your U and your registration marks showing on the screen. Then we just go to File. I always try to use Print with Preview, so that way we can actually see the image and how it's going to print out on our screen. And then print it. I'm not going to actually print it right now, but I'll show you guys some printing techniques and what output options to use later. Then we unhighlight the U, and then we highlight the S. Now we go to print our second layer. Once again, going with Print with Preview and then printing it. Once the S is printed, we unhighlight the S, and then we come back and we highlight the A. Now, once the A is printed, we're done printing the image. So if you notice, throughout the whole printing process, we never move this text layer. Those plus signs stay the same spot every single time. You're going to want to make sure that your registration marks are always on the same spot in each design, so that when you go to set up your job, you can register them correctly. The second way to use registration marks is actually in the Print with Preview mode. We're going to come here and we're going to unhighlight that text layer, so we can show you the second way to use registration marks. If you come here and Print with Preview, you can actually add registration marks. If you go to your Show More Options, if you click Show More Options in your Print with Preview, you can add registration marks by selecting Output option and then just clicking to add registration marks on your screen. Now, if you notice, I'm clicking this button, but I can't see any registration marks. That's because our image size is as big as our paper size. So you have to make sure that your image size is smaller than your paper size. I'm going to cancel out of that. Since we have a small image, I'm going to simply use our crop tool, which in Photoshop the crop tool is right here. I'll click on that, and I'm going to highlight all my letters again, and then I'm going to come crop the image. Because we don't need to use such a big palette if we're just having a small design. Once the image is highlighted, you can right click it and then hit crop. That takes your design down from a big canvas down to a small workable area. We're going to come back to Print with Preview mode. First of all, we're going to start out with a U once again, come back with print with preview mode, and then can show you guys better how to add registration marks. Now, if you click this button, you can add these registration marks to each corner of your design. Now, once you print your second, like the color or the second color, the S, when you hit add registration marks, it's going to add them the same spot on each screen. Now, the disadvantage to using the registration marks in Photoshop or the registration marks in print with preview mode is if you can see them on the screen, they're very, very high detail. So if using a big mesh screen, basically a 110 mesh is a fairly larger mesh, you're not going to be able to expose fine detail on that. So, using 110 mesh, I would suggest probably using the plus signs. However, if we have a very, very intricate design that requires a higher mesh screen, like a 230 mesh or a 305 mesh, then these fine registration marks will show. Now, don't worry about if I'm not making sense talking about these mesh sizes right now, because we're going to discuss about that more through the video, and once we discuss that, that's going to make more sense to you guys. So once we print this, we're going to come and then print the second layer, which is the S, print with preview, and then the registration marks, if they're already pulled up, they're going to be in the same spot. So after we've done that, we printed each color and having the registration marks on them. Now, Photoshop's really cool. It gives you the ability to, highlight each text layer. You can go highlight that layer. Let's say we want to come up here and change the font. We just simply select the font changing tool and we can scroll down through the fonts, pick out different fonts. There's so many things that you can do with Photoshop. There's no way I can cover them right now, because if we covered them all right now, we couldn't get to the fun stuff, which is the actual printing part. So I'd recommend you guys getting a book. It's called Photoshop for Screen Printers. We sell it on our website, and it's a great book that goes over how to use the basic features and the plus features of Photoshop to create your best images and your best artwork creation in Photoshop using that book. That book's a great tool to use. Let's get to our next part of our artwork, which is actually taking a flat image that has multiple colors in it and color separating it. There we show you how to create a multicolor image out of just using text or simple text or artwork creation layers. You're just going to want to create each text or each part of the image that's going to be a different color in a new layer. One thing I forgot to show you is that to add a layer, you simply come up here to Layer tool right there, a Layer tab, and then just hit New Layer. That's like if you're doing some drawing or something on the screen and you're not creating a new text layer, you want to add a layer before you start working or drawing on that new layer for that new part or new color in your image. Now we're going to pull up a new design, and we're going to show you guys how to color separate that. This is a design of Bart drawing on a chalkboard. Basically, this is what is called a flat design, meaning that it has no layers. Even though there's multiple colors to this image, it's all one layer. If you notice here down in your Layers tab, there's only one layer. It's called the background. So, in order to print this out, we're going to have to take each one of these colors and we're going to have to color separate them into different layers. To do that in Photoshop, you first have to highlight the layer. Now, to highlight the layer, the easiest way to do it is come up here and use your Magic Wand tool. Your Magic Wand tool lets you select between color tones and highlights those specific color tones on an image. One thing you want to know about your threshold tool, or excuse me, your Magic Wand tool, is that it has up here what is called a tolerance. Now you want to keep your tolerance, what a tolerance is how much of the color or how much of the tone it selects. You want to keep your tolerance between 40 and 50 is where we found that it works the best. So let's start with his skin tone. Using our little Magic Wand tool, we're going to come down here and we are going to just simply click on his skin tone. I'm going to zoom up a little bit. I'm going to use hotkeys to zoom up. It's basically using the Control and then plus sign, and that's going to zoom up on our image. Just a quick hint for you guys. Now, if you see here, all our Bart's skin is highlighted in his face. It selected all the color tones of his skin tone. Now, we're going to have to also select his arms and his legs and this little tiny piece of chalk right there. So, to do that, you hit your Shift key, and if you see, once you hit your Shift key, it's going to pull up a little plus sign down below your Magic Wand tool. You hit your Shift key and then you come select your next part of the same color. That's going to select his arm. Holding down our shift key, we just come here and we hit click once. That's going to select his other arm. We click once on his leg. That's going to select his leg. And then we click once on his other leg. That's going to select his second leg. Now, to come grab this little small piece of chalk, we're going to zoom way in on this image using the Control plus key. We're going to hit Shift. That's going to bring that plus sign up. Then we're going to click that part. And then we're going to click that part. So once we have that whole color, that whole layer selected, we're just going to zoom back so we can see everything that we're doing. And basically zooming out is just hitting Control and then your minus tab. You hit down your Control and then you hit your minus, then you can zoom in. Control plus zooms out. Control minus zooms out, Control plus zooms in. Once our whole layers are selected, we simply right click on our selected area, and then we go down and we select Layer via Cut. And what that's going to do is that's going to cut each of our highlighted portions into a new layer. Once I've done that, you guys can actually see his skin, all his skin tone is on a new layer. Now if you're wondering what these checker marks here, this checker mark means that it's a transparent background. So the only thing that is showing right now is his layer. You're going to want to use a transparent background as much as possible because it's the easiest to work with. However, sometimes I do, change it to a white background because, sometimes it's hard to see with all these dots. Coming back here. Now we're going to want to go back to our Layers tab, and we're going to want to highlight the background layer. Because if we have his skin tone, if you notice, the skin tone layer is highlighted right now. If we have that, we're working on the skin tone palette, so we're not going to be able to color select anything out of that background layer. So simply we come back here, we highlight the background layer, and then we come back to the image, and let's take his clothes out. So once again, just select his clothes. We hit the shift sign, come back to his arm sleeve right here, come back to his pants, and then do both his shoes. Once everything is selected, we right click on the image and then we come down, Layer via Cut. That's going to cut his clothes into a new layer. So now we have his skin in one layer, his clothes in the second layer, and then our third layers are the chalkboard and the actual black, which is called, in this image, is called a black trap. A black trap is basically any type of black outline that's going to actually, if you see here, it's something that brings everything together. It's going to fully encompass and finish up our image. So first of all, let's highlight the school text on the chalkboard. Now, it's selected text on the chalkboard. However, if we zoom in here, you're going to notice that the inside of these P's and the inside of these E's, the inside of this G and this S, they're not selected, they're not highlighted. The reason that is that because they have a white border all the way around them, so it's not selecting that color tone. So basically, we're going to come in here and we're going to select each one of these. And this is where it can get a little time consuming. So, artwork creation is always going to be a little time consuming. It's going to be probably the thing you're going to need to learn the most about. For the sake of time in this DVD, we're going to stop doing this and come to this image when it's all these things are already selected. Alright, once we have everything highlighted, we're going to once again come and right click the highlighted portion and then select Layer via Cut. That's going to cut our third layer. Now since this layer had so many small intricate parts to it, we're going to really want to take that and make sure that we got everything. To do that, we're going to come and unhighlight or unsee that layer, and that's going to show us that yes, we got everything major, but we did miss a couple little small things right there that our selection tool just didn't pick up, which or might not picked up that whole part of the inside of the circle or something. So to make sure this image is nice and clean when we go to print film, we're going to take our eraser tool and we're going to erase the inside of this chalkboard. To do that, so to come over here and select our eraser pad right there, and then come back to our palette, select the layer that we're working on, and then simply erase the inside of the chalkboard. Now, A couple little tips that I want to show you guys on erasing is that using Photoshop in your erase palette, if you click on one part of the image and then hold your shift key down and then come all the way over here and click on another part of the image, it's going to erase in a straight line that whole part that you just went over. So it makes the erasing process, sometimes if you're having to get in and correct an image up and clean it up a lot, it makes it a little faster. You get nice straight edges for you. So we're going to come here, once again, we're going to erase our whole inside of our chalkboard so we have a nice clean image to work with. Once that is done, we now have each of our colors in a different layer. We have our black trap layer, we have our green chalkboard layer, we have our blue close layer, and then we have our skin tone layer. Now, basically, we're going to need to do one more step, or actually a couple more steps, but one more main step before we go to print that. And that is, you have to transpose this into a black image before you go to print it. Now, the basic easiest way to transpose a layer into black is to come up here. First you want to highlight the layer that you're working on. Come up here to your image tab, go to adjustments, and then come down and select threshold. Selecting the threshold, it basically takes out all color tone of the image. You can, once this threshold is selected, you select the threshold level and pull it up until every part of the image is black. So right now, every part of his hand or his image, every part of his skin tone is black. And we have to do that to each layer before we go to print it. So come down here and select his his blue clothes. Image, adjustments, down to the threshold, and make sure the clothes are all black. Same thing with the green chalkboard. Select the color, image, adjustments, and then threshold, changing the chalkboard to black. Now, once all our images are black, we can then go into print with preview mode and then add registration marks. However, there was one problem to this image, if you guys notice. The problem is that, see our black trap layer? Now, even though our black trap layer, we color separated everything, you notice how there's a little bit of line between our black trap layer and the insides of our design right here? That line's going to show up on our print. So when you're printing with a black trap layer, you always want to make sure that it's a little bit bigger, about 101%, or excuse me, if the chalkboard's at 100%, the black trap layer is going to probably want to be around 100.1 or 100.2%. It's just a little bit bigger, so it covers that image and makes it cleans it up nice, so you don't have any spots of your shirt poking through your design. To do that, we're going to come to the black chalkboard layer, which is the trap layer, and we're going to have to create this on a clear background or a transparent background. Now, to create that on a transparent background, that way it allows us to edit just the black parts of the design. To create that on a transparent background, we have to come here and we have to select our layer, our erase tool, and then first of all I have to select the part of the image that we're working on. Select our erase tool, right click on the erase tool. That's going to give us different eraser options. We're going to select our magic erase tool, and then our magic erase tool takes out parts of the images, whole parts of the images that we don't need. Now, our magic erase tool is going to take out the background. We're going to also want to take out the inside of the chalkboard, his head. We're going to want to take out each part of the image so that all we have is the black trap layer showing on a clear, transparent background. That is the goal of this exercise. So take out that part of his shoes, take out the inside of this chalkboard right here, take out the inside of the eraser. Yep. Go back one step. Have to zoom in a little bit to take out the inside of this eraser. Make sure that every part of the image that we don't want is erased, and we're left with a black trap on a transparent background. Now once we have just that black trap on a transparent background, we can come and we can put a stroke on it. And what a stroke's going to do, it's kind of like it takes that layer and it expands it out just a little bit. Now by putting a stroke on it, we're going to come down here to this little F tab on our layers palette and select stroke. Now usually, I don't know on your Photoshop, but in my Photoshop the stroke always comes up red. We just change the color to black because once again we're going to always want to work with black. Change the color to black, and then by selecting the pixels we can actually select the depth and density of our stroke. Now what we're going to need to do is I notice here that some of a part of our image did not get erased all the way. So we're just going to have to come in, if you see these little parts of our silkscreensupplies.com are still in there, we're going to come and erase those just using our eraser tool so that we have a clean image to work with, because if those stay there, they're going to show up on the film. We don't want that to happen. Once we make sure that our image is 100% cleaned up, the chalkboard inside is 100% cleaned up, we're going to want to come back to the stroke and view that and select the stroke pixel that we want. See, if we come back and select like a big pixel, it's just going to, you know, the higher we get, the bigger stroke is going to give it. Usually you want probably maybe between a 6 pixel to maybe a 7 pixel stroke line, and you can test the stroke line. Once just hit OK, and that's going to leave that stroke on there. You can test the stroke line by bringing up another part of your image. Now, we're bringing up the chalkboard again. We see that yes, there is a little bit of the chalkboard poking through. So, we're going to want to just go back to the layer with the stroke on it, select the stroke again, and just bump up the pixels a little bit so that the edge of the chalkboard no longer peeks through. Hit OK. And once the edge of the chalkboard no longer peeks through, you're going to be able to, you know, correctly encompass and correctly tie that whole image together. Now one thing I'm going to show you how to do right now is to create that white flash layer. Now let's say we're going to print this shirt on a white, print on a white shirt. We're not going to have to create a white flash layer because it's going on a white background, so we're printing color on a white background. However, if we're printing this shirt on a dark shirt, like a red shirt or a blue shirt or a black shirt, then we're going to have to put down a white layer of ink below each layer of our text. So we create a white flash plate or a white flash layer in our artwork so that all our text has white ink underneath it. To do this, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to save our color separated design right now. And we're going to go File, Save As, and then we're going to want to save it differently from the file that we opened it. So let's save it as Bart Shirt Separated. Or Bart Shirt Separated. Bart Shirt Sep. Coming here, saving that. So now we have saved this as a different layer. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to reopen that flat image that we originally started with. Go to Open, and then pick the Bart Shirt flat image which we started with. That's going to create our original image. Now I'm going to drag this original image into our current palette simply by doing that. And then I'm going to roughly place it the same place as our image right there. But in order to see that, we're going to only thing we're going to have to do is come here and we're going to have to cut out this white background. Doing that, we're going to go to Eraser, going to go to a Magic Eraser, and then just hit the white background. That's going to cut it out. We're going to also cut out between his legs and between his arm right there because we don't want that to show up on the screen. Once that whole layer is cut out, we just want to make sure that it's in the right spot. So come in here and move it around, make sure it's in the right spot. Once it's in the right spot, we do what is called a color overlay. That's done in your layers tool up here, your layers menu. Go to layer style and do a color overlay. And what a color overlay does is it takes that whole layer and lays a certain color over it. In this case, since we're wanting to create a screen out of that, we're going to want to color overlay it with black. So, I'm going to change the color to black. That's going to turn that whole layer into black. Now, once that whole layer is black, what we have to do is, since it's a white flash plate, is that we have to shrink it just a tiny bit so we don't have white edges poking out the edges of our design. You don't want that. You want the design to look nice. You want the design to have the black trap surrounding it, but not the little pieces of white poking out the edges. So to do that, we're going to come to Edit menu, then we're going to go to Transform, and then we're going to go to Scale. Now, this allows us to scale our image. Now we can scale our image just small parts at a time by coming up here and actually viewing the percentage, the width and the height percentage. Now instead of 100%, we're going to want to probably create it at 99.9%. That's going to scale it down just enough so that we're not going to have edges of our film poking out. It's 99.9. Once again, you can test this, apply that change. You can test this by highlighting and unhighlighting your black trap layer, because if you notice, we highlight it, we unhighlight it, and then we'll highlight it. You can see that the black trap layer is obviously bigger than the white flash plate. So as long as that's happening, we're fine, and we have our 5 layers of our image, and we're ready to print them. So let's start out by printing the black flash layer first, and then using the 2 different ways to print. Now, this is a larger image, so we're going to print it with a larger printer. We go to Print with Preview mode. We have to change our Print with Preview mode or our page setup to a larger printer's page setup. I'm going to use an Epson 2200 printer to print this design. An Epson 2200 printer, the new version of the Epson 2200 printer is called the Epson R1800 printer, but the Epson 2200 printer is about a year old. It's what we use in our shop here. The Epson 2200 printer can print 13 inches wide by 19-inch sheets, or 13 inches wide. You actually put it on a roll and print is up to 100 feet on a roll. But this image is a larger image, so we're going to go Page Setup. We're going to select our printer to the Epson 2200. Hit OK. And that's going to give us different page sizes. The size of page we're going to print on, the size of film that we have today is 12 by 18 film. And then we're going to want to print it, since it's a landscape image, we're going to want to change it from portrait to printing into landscape. Hit OK. So now we can see our image on the landscape film. Now this is what you call a spot color design, meaning that there's no fades, there's no shadows, there's no blends of the ink. It's a very, very basic text, not text, but logo or cartoon image. So we're going to be probably printing this on a 110 or a 155 mesh screen. Being that we're printing it on a lower mesh, we're going to use, instead of using the Photoshop registration marks, we're going to use just simple plus signs. So I'm going to cancel out of that. I'm going to come add our plus signs as a new text layer. You want, once again, at least 3 to 4 plus signs. Now, you don't want to use super big, bulky plus signs. You're going to want to use probably, more fine-tuned text if you're going to use plus signs. Maybe something about this big. Oh, excuse me. And you want to position those on the image, away from the text, away from the image, in 3 to 4 areas. So once our plus signs are on there, we're going to go to Print with Preview mode, make sure it looks okay. We see that our image is here and we see our plus signs. Now, when we print we have 5 copies of this film to print out. Each color has to be printed on a separate film. So we want to leave these plus signs once again on the same spot on each film. I have to stress that. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to use your print settings and print modes to achieve the best quality film. Now, since we've transposed this image into a black image on a clear background, obviously we have to have a very, very black film. I'm going to give you guys some examples of black films later. But right now, as we're working on the computer, I'm going to show you how to change your print settings, for your printers to create the blackest films possible. Now, right now, we are using an Epson printer, Epson 2200 printer. Now, our company definitely recommends using Epson printers. The higher end Epson printers for the larger format, like the Epson R1800, the Epson 2400, or the Epson 4800. Now, these printers can print larger formats. They have the ability to be able to print a halftone, which we'll talk about once again later at the end of this section. But the higher end Epson printers are better for printing. Obviously, if you want to create a larger image than just a normal 8.5 by 11 or 8.5 by 14 sheet, you're going to need a higher end Epson printer. Now, once our image is ready to print, we have a black image on a clear background or a white background that's going to print a black image on our transparency film. Now, the transparency film, which we're going to cover in a second here, is we have a black image, so we're going to want to have a black, very, very black image on our transparency film. Now, I'm going to show you guys some different options of films to use, but I'm going to first show you here, since we're on the computer right now, how to select your printer settings to achieve the blackest films possible. Now, today we are using, you can use all different types of printers, but the more higher end printer you use, the better image you're going to get. Epson printers, for instance, are awesome to use when printing film because they're photorealistic printers. They print photos. That's what they're made for. So you have a lot of setting changes in the Epson printers that you can change settings. You can make them print higher density of ink levels to create darker images on your film. Right now we're going to print this image, as I mentioned before, on an Epson 2200 printer. So, printing a basic text image on an Epson 2200 printer. This is pretty much the same thing for the Epson R1800, which is the new version of the 2200, and the Epson 2400, which is also a little bit higher end version of the R1800. So, you're going to select your properties. Your properties are going to give you the option to choose what kind of ink density, what kind of output paper you're going to use. So, you're always going to want to select best photo. That means the printer is going to print the highest quality resolution possible. Also, you're going to want to select your paper as being, basically with Epson, I'm not sure if it works the same way with HP or Brother, but with Epson, the further you go down, the more ink it lays on the paper. What we found works the best with printing Epson transparencies is using a premium glossy photo paper setting. So, if your printer has a transparency setting or a transparency paper selection tool, we actually found using the premium glossy photo paper, selection works better than using a transparency selection. For instance, this one, the Epson 2200, does not have that transparency mode, so we're just going to select premium glossy photo paper. One thing that we're also going to want to do is go into the advanced settings here and then change it to print with black ink only. By doing that, we just select, it says print black ink only here. Just check that button and then hit OK. And once again, go into properties. We always want to select best quality photo. We want to make sure that we select premium glossy or glossy photo paper, and then we want to print with black ink only. Now, let's say we're going to use we have another option, and I'm going to show you guys those printers in a second here, an Epson R300, which basically an Epson R300 is a small version of the 2200. It only prints 8.5 by 11 inches wide, but you can print 8.5 by 11 inches wide up to 14 inches. Now, I'm going to select the R300. If you notice here, when we go into the properties, the settings are going to be a little bit different. We're still going to pick best photo, but if you notice, there's an inkjet transparency setting there. Now, like I said, for some reason when printing on the inkjet transparencies, we realized that It works better when you're using a premium glossy photo paper instead of the transparency setting. For some reason, when you're printing transparency setting, the printer tends to band. So you're going to want to select premium glossy photo paper, then go into advanced settings, and black ink only, hit OK, and then you're ready to print. So basically, I'm going to go through this design one more time, one final time, to show you guys, start to scratch, how to print this design. We're going to print the white flash player first. We'll unhighlight that. Then let's print his skin tone. Print with preview, make sure it shows up okay. Hit print. Then we're going to unselect that, come down here and print his clothes. Print with preview. Make sure everything shows up okay. Print, once again, keeping the registration marks, whether using the Photoshop registration marks or the text plus signs, keeping them in the same spot for each layer. And then we're going to print the chalkboard, keeping the registration marks at the same spot, and then the black trap layer. Once everything is printed, you're ready to start exposing your screen. Alright, now we're going to talk about films, and we're going to talk about printers to print those films. You can basically use any type of printer that you want to print films. However, you will find that certain types of printers will print films better than others. You can use your normal desktop printer, you can use a laser printer, a laser photocopier. You can actually take your films down to Kinko's and have them photocopy them onto transparencies for you. Or you can use a high-end Epson photo printer. Now, laser printers used to be kind of a screen printing industry standard. You would print on a laser printer with a laser receptive film, and you would get a fairly dark transparency. However, with new Epson technology, we're finding that Epson printers are working much better. Epson inkjet printers are working much better to print on your transparency films. Now, for laser printers, like I said, you have your laser film for that laser printer. It's usually a fairly milky colored film. And for your inkjet printers, you have your standard inkjet receptive film, and then you have your waterproof film, which is also not quite as clear, but a little milky color. All three of those films are 100% light transparent, so they're all going to work great for printing on your, exposing your screens. So let's talk about your standard inkjet film. Now, it's basically like an overhead transparency sheet, except it has one side that's a little rough, and that is your inkjet receptive side. So if you could feel this film right now, there's going to be one side that is smooth and one side that is a little rough. Now, the reason I'm talking about this film is because this is probably the most popular film that we sell, and we sell this in most of our kits, and that also most of the people that buy are going to use your standard inkjet receptive film. Now, your inkjet waterproof film is going to be smooth on both sides, and it's going to be more of a milky color. Now, the difference between the standard inkjet receptive film and the inkjet waterproof film is that the waterproof film, it dries as soon as the ink hits that from the printer, it dries instantly. So that on this printer's film, it takes maybe 30-40 seconds up to a couple minutes to dry the ink on this film. However, on the waterproof film, once it hits, it dries instantaneously. So if you're printing on a newer Epson printer, a lot of times, like for instance Epson R1800 printer, if they have inkjet rollers on them and you're doing a very high detail that's very fine lines or half-tone dots, very small dots, the rollers will run through the inkjet receptive film and actually leave roller marks. So using a waterproof film, as soon as the ink hits that film, it's completely dry, so you don't get roller marks in your film. I'm going to come over here and focus on just a couple printer options over here. These are two Epson printers. The smaller one is the Epson R300. The larger one is the Epson 2200. Now the smaller one, as we showed back, you can print 8.5 by 11 by 14 inches wide. Long. That's the biggest film you can print with this printer. With this printer, you can print up to 13 inches wide, and then you can actually put it on a roll in the back here and you print up to 100 feet long. Now, one other difference in these printers is with this printer you're using the standard Epson ink. Now that's just, it's actually a 7-color printer. It has 2 blacks and then cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and then light cyan, light magenta, and light yellow. So with this printer you also have 7 colors. However, with this printer we have a replacement ink. It's called Fast Ink that actually pops in the black cartridge, and the Fast Ink is a super opaque black dye ink. Basically, with any type of printer that you use, whether it be HP or Dell, whatever type of printer you're using, the black ink that comes in those printers, that's meant for printing colors or meant for printing just basic text. It's not a very, very dark or transparent image. To get our screen to expose properly, we're going to need a very, very dark ink on our film. That way, it exposes good, it blocks out 100% of the light, and you have very, very good looking screens. Now, I'm going to show you the difference here between maybe a couple films. This film right here was printed with just normal printer ink. Now, it might look black up there, but if you can focus in on that, you see the white paper, or if you hold it up to light, you actually see that you can clearly see light through that black image. That's because it's printed with a clear, not a clear, but a photo process ink. The black ink that printed this film, it's not meant for printing films, it's meant for printing full color images. Now, this is an ink. This is the Fast Ink. This is the super opaque black ink. If you hold this up to a paper there, you can see it's much darker. If you hold it up to light, if you can see it up to light, you can't see through that ink whatsoever. This is the same print settings using the standard Epson ink, using the Fast Ink. Now, the downside of using like a smaller printer like the Epson R300 is that you can't buy Fast Ink for that. It's not available yet anyway. If it's available, we'll definitely let you guys know. But using the print settings with that film, with that printer and these films, and the print settings that we showed earlier, you still can get fairly good transparencies, but you're not going to get as near as good results as using an Epson R1800, Epson 4800, or Epson 2400 with the Fast Ink cartridges. They get awesome films. Now, one thing I also wanted to show you guys is another advantage to waterproof film is, let's say you're in your screen room, and you guys will see this later, and you spill water or you spill coffee or something on your film. See all that? That's just splotted ink because our ink ran, because this film's not waterproof. This is standard film. If this were a waterproof film, it would have simply just ran over the image and your film would have been fine in case you needed to use it again for exposure. So, once again, to cover that, you always want to print on the inkjet receptive side. If you're using inkjet film, you're going to want to print the inkjet receptive side, which is the rough side. A lot of people, if you're printing on the smooth side is just going to run. So if you notice that when you print your film and your film's just running off the paper, like, oh, my film's bad, it doesn't work. No, you're printing on the wrong side. You want to print on the slightly rough side. If you're using a waterproof film, you don't have to worry about that because the ink's going to dry, and it's going to dry instantaneously. One other thing that you're going to want to be careful with is that you're always going to want to print your films out highest quality as we showed you before in those print settings. Now, if you're using an inkjet printer that's not as good, like let's say you're using a Hewlett Packard or a Dell printer that you may have gotten free with your computer, you might have to print 2 transparencies and stack them on top of each other. So this is our transparency printed with just a normal printer ink. Since it's not very opaque, we need to make it more opaque so it'll expose good on the screens. This you're going to learn about more later, but we're going to need to take that, we're going to need to print another copy out, and we're going to need to stack them on top of each other. By stacking them on top of each other, they're twice as opaque. Now, it's kind of a pain because you have to make sure that it's 100% stacked on top of each other so you don't get any shadows in your images. What I usually do is once I get them lined up correctly, just tape them off, tape like a couple edges so they don't move around. One other thing that you can do is you can touch your film up. Let's say your printer missed a spot, or you scratched part of your image off, or part of your image just needs to be a little bit darker, we have film opaquer tools that's kind of like a magic marker, except it prints or it writes with a super dark ink that you could come in and show you a picture of the film before, and then if you have to replace a couple spots, just going over it with the film opaquer tool right there, or fix a couple spots, just use your film opaquer tool. I just did a small line of that film with that, and if you can see, on a white piece of paper here and on a clear background, that part of the image is much darker. One thing that you can also do if you're using a laser printer is we have what's called Toner Aid. A Toner Aid is a spray-on product that basically, it only works if you're using a laser printer, because a laser printer prints with toner, not ink. So you spray it over the toner of the black image, and it actually darkens up that toner probably about 5 to 10%. So if you're using a laser printer, you're going to want to check into Toner Aid. We sell that on our website under the spray products page. Now there's one more type of printing and one more process of the printing and film creation that I wanted to quickly touch on before we went into the darkroom. That is printing like a full color picture, or printing tones, printing a shade in an image, and that's what's called printing a halftone. Basically, your normal printer, your standard inkjet printer, even your Epson printers cannot print a tone. If we were going to print a full color image on your printer, it would print it in shades, like it would print it in a complete gradient level. Now, when you go into the darkroom, a complete gradient level won't expose on your screens. So you have to transpose that gradient level into what's called a halftone image. Now, let me show you an example of a picture that's printed out. That's printed just using a normal printer, like sending it right straight into the printer. Now, if you can tell, this picture just has, basic gradients lines. It goes from light strictly to dark without any tone variation in there. And if we went and tried to expose this on a screen, basically what we would get is we would get an exposure there, which we would get ink coming through the screen there, and then at some point in this lighter area, it would simply stop. There would be no tone. It would just go from ink to no ink, and there would be a line instead of a fade. In order to get that to fade, we have to use what's called a halftone. Now, this is an image that's printed in halftones. Now you can see this, instead of having just a gradient line go from light to dark, it's a bunch of little tiny dots that start concentrated and go to very, very sparse towards the lighter sections of the page. Now, being that those are dots, not gradient lines, we can expose that on our screen. Unfortunately, using a standard printer, using a standard desktop printer, using a standard laser printer, you can't print halftones. Printers print in lines. In order to print in halftones, you have to use what's called a RIP software. That basically turns this line, this gradient line, into halftone images. And you also have to use specific printers. You can't go get a RIP software and use it with an Epson all-in-one printer or an HP all-in-one desktop printer. There are specific Epson printers that the RIP is made for. A RIP is called a raster image processor that transposes, once again, transposes those gradient lines into halftone dots. Now, we have a DVD that's called Intro to 4-Color Process. That goes over using RIP, using the Photoshop software to color separate a full color image, printing in halftone dots. It covers that whole process to start to finish. The DVD is once again called Intro to 4-Color Process, and that's available through our website. But that's going to show you guys, if you guys are interested in printing full color work, if you're interested in recreating a picture or printing somebody's face on a shirt, you have the print in halftones, and that DVD is going to show you how to do that. We also sell a complete printer package if you guys are in the market for a printer. It's an Epson R1800, which is a very, very good Epson printer. The RIP software and that special fast ink software, along with a 100-pack of the 13x18 waterproof film, completely together in one package that we sell on our website. So if you're looking in the market for a very, very good high output printer, that's what you're going to need to print these halftones with. That's what you're going to need to get super opaque dark images with. We have that complete package available. Now we're done. Let's go into the darkroom expose. welcome to our darkroom. Before we get started in our exposure and screen preparation process, I wanted to give you guys a quick tour of our darkroom, show you the different components involved in a darkroom, maybe give you some ideas to how to set your darkroom up yourself. First of all, we have our exposure unit and our exposure table. The exposure unit just sits on the table. It's a tabletop exposure unit. We have some table space here to coat screens on and set films up on jobs when ready to expose them. Then we have our screen library rack. This is where we store old screens, new screens that are coated and degreased, and people that want to save their jobs, we just put them up and categorize them on that rack. Then we have our drying rack right here. This also will have a black sheet over it, so if we're in a light lit environment like we are right now, we can keep this light safe while the rest of the room is lit up. This holds 16 screens. It's for drying screens and for keeping exposed screens or unexposed light safe. Now we have our pressure washer. Now this pressure washer is just a small table mount pressure washer. It's 1500 psi. We recommend you guys getting maybe between 1000 and 1500 psi pressure washer. We picked this one up at Home Depot for about $99. So you don't have to go out and splurge on a huge, very expensive pressure washer. It's just a small electric pressure washer that we mounted to our wall and ran some hose into this room to run it. Next over here, we have our washout sink. Now this particular washout sink is a fairly large one. It also is backlit so we can see what we're doing when we're washing our screens out. This holds up to 2 screens at a time, one side, that one side there. We can wash our screens out, degrease our screens, dehaze our screens. All the screen washing process is done in this wash sink. Finally over here we have our dip tank. Now our dip tank is used for reclaiming screens in a mass quantity. Like instead of having to go, and we'll show you later in this process how to reclaim screen one at a time, we simply put them in the dip tank, pull them out. They sit in the dip tank for about 5 minutes. We pull them out and then we wash them out and then degrease them. It makes the process a lot easier. Alright, now that we showed you the darkroom, we're going to go ahead and get started in this process. At this point in the video, we're going to discuss one of the most important parts of the screen printing process. That is setting up your darkroom for screen exposure, washing your screens out, and then we'll also talk about screen preparation and then reclaiming screens. First of all, a darkroom needs to be 100% light free of any UV rays. UV rays are your basic like fluorescent light bulbs. They're sunlight coming in from a window, a normal house light bulb. You want your darkroom to be set up so that it does not have any of that light coming in. So basically you're going to want to set a darkroom up. You can use a room that has windows in it, but if a room has windows in it, you're going to want to put some kind of curtains over the windows, a black trash bag. We have this product called Ulano Amberlith, and Amberlith's like a red film that you just tape over your windows, and that blocks all the UV rays out, but it still lets light in. Then once your room's 100% UV ray light free, you're going to want to get yourself a standard light safe bulb. Now a light safe bulb is a normal bulb that has a yellow filament over it that blocks out all UV rays. They're basically like bug lights. We sell them on our website. You can also go down and buy them at Home Depot or Lowe's. You want it between a 40 watt and a 60 watt bug light, and you can either plug this into your light fixture up on top, or you can plug it into like maybe a little desk lamp like that you can turn on and off like so. You basically want your room to only have this light or light coming in from a filtered window with the Amberlith over it so that no UV rays are coming in your room. The reason we want to block out the UV rays is because the screen exposure process is light sensitive. When you put emulsion or film on the screen, you can't have any UV rays getting exposed to that until you actually expose your screen with your light source. Your light source is very, very high UV ray content, so when you expose your screens, that's when the UV rays are supposed to hit them. But if they're drying and UV rays are hitting them, or if you're taking them outside to try to wash them out in the sunlight, UV rays will hit them then. Or if you're leaving them in a lit room or opening a door, that's going to damage your screen before you go to expose it, and your images aren't going to come out very good. So now that we've talked about that, we're going to go over what you need to all your cleaning chemicals, all your cleaning supplies, your emulsions. Most of our kits come with chemical starter kit. The chemical starter kit pretty much has everything in it that you need to get started. I'm going to basically go through that kit, pull products out, and I'll explain each product and what it does. First thing that we're going to pull out is your scrub brushes. Now your scrub brushes, there's 3 of them in a kit. You're going to want usually 3 of them at least. One is for degreasing of screens, one is for reclaiming of screens, and then one is for using a liquid Renew-It or using a dehazer. Now you're going to want to take a magic marker and you're going to want to mark, degreaser, dehazer, and then reclaimer. And you don't want to mix these up, so you will always want to keep these separate, because if you mix these up, they're going to cross-contaminate with different chemicals, and they could hurt your screens and not work as well. So you always want to keep these separate. You always want to keep them washed down after you're done using them. So these are very important to have in your screen reclaiming and preparation process. The next thing that we're going to pull out is called ER80. It is super concentrate emulsion remover. Basically this bottle here mixes with 1 gallon of water, so you're going to want to get an empty gallon jug, dump this bottle in, and then fill the rest of the jug with water. Now this is just this particular kind of emulsion remover. Not all of them are mixing to that ratio. This is just a super concentrate one. We have also other ones that mix 4:1 to water that may work a little bit better, but this one works really good and just basically is for reclaiming your screens once you're done and need to put a new image on a screen. This purple or dark red product is called Neutralize. This is your screen degreaser. This is what you use before you start your screen printing process. You always want to degrease your screens to get all the contaminants, all the dust. People handle them, like in our factory when we go ship out a screen, the workers are handling the screens, they're getting all their grease from their fingertips. The screen manufacturer is the same way, dust from a shop. You always want to start out degreasing. Also, when you're reclaimed a job and you're going to put some a new design on the screen, you're going to want to degrease that as well. So this is very, very important. This product can either be used concentrate form or it can be mixed up to 3:1 with water. We probably suggest using it in concentrate form. That way you get the most results, the best results out of your screen degreaser. Basically, you can take this and you just put it in a spray bottle, or put a spray bottle right into this. You can screw right down in the cap and just spray your screens out, and then you want to use your degreasing brush to scrub the degreaser around and work it into the screen. Now don't be afraid if you don't understand any of this, because we're going to go and demonstrate this all later. The next product that we're going to pull out is called your Liquid Renew-It. Now Liquid Renew-It is a dehazer. It's a very friendly dehazer. Dehazers take old ghost images, like if you printed ink through a screen, the ink's going to stain the screen. It's going to leave a ghost image or a haze in that screen. And the dehazer is rubbed on and then let sit for a while, and then it's washed off, and that will actually bleach the screen out. This is your Screen Wash 147. Now some people get this confused with your emulsion remover because it says Screen Wash, but most of your screen washes and your press washes are actually used to take ink off the screen when you're cleaning your screens. It's a very, very friendly product to use. It smells like a citrus base. It smells like pretty much any household cleaner, and actually you just take this, put it on a paper towel or a throwaway rag, and clean off your ink from your screen, and before you're either reclaiming them or if you're saving screens for other jobs. Once again, we're going to show this later. Most of our chemical starter kits just come with a chemical resistant spray bottle. The spray bottle is just, you can use, I'd recommend getting a couple of them, one for your emulsion remover, one for your screen degreaser, one for your Liquid Renew-It. You also want to get a maybe more heavy duty spray bottles so that the chemicals don't break down the seals and stuff in the spray bottles. This product is called Red Coat Blockout. Basically, this is used to block out those pinholes that you get in your screens. Like if you have any dust on your exposure unit or any specks in your film that you don't want there, this can actually come, and you can take this with a little paintbrush. You can dap out those specks on your screen, and this dries, and that will keep those screens. You can also use this to block out your registration marks if you want to. So we'll also show that product being used later. These two containers are just an industrial grade hand cleaner. They work really well for getting emulsion off your hands, getting ink off your hands. They're a great product to have in your shop for your employees or for yourself. Then we have our emulsion. Now this is called DXP diazo or dual cure emulsion. Now let me go into the different types of emulsion now just to explain to you guys for a second. Pretty much there are two types of emulsion. There is a pre-sensitized or photopolymer emulsion, and then there is this diazo dual cure emulsion. Now the pre-sensitized photopolymer emulsion is already pre-mixed. The diazo has a little activator that you mix up half with water, half with distilled water, usually warm water. You shake it around, mix it in, and we'll show this later. And that's what activates this product and makes it light sensitive, so it'll expose to the UV rays when you're exposing it on your exposure unit. Now the pre-sensitized emulsion is pre-mixed. It has this in it already. The problem is a lot of people will think, okay, pre-mixed emulsion is going to work faster. It actually has a little bit longer shelf life. The pre-mixed emulsion lasts for about a year. This lasts for about 6 months, which is the actual industry leader on the shelf life of this emulsion. Most of the other dual cure emulsions will only last for about 3 months. But the problem is that even though that emulsion is pre-mixed, the exposure to latitude times on that emulsion is very, very small. So that if you overexpose or underexpose an image, your images aren't going to come out. You're going to actually have very, very hard times washing them out. I remember when I was in the beginning of my screen printing process or screen printing career, I switched to using a photosensitive or a pre-sensitized emulsion because the company that I bought my supplies for ran out of this kind. And our exposure times had to be so exact that if you went overexposed for a second or underexposed for a second, our screens wouldn't come out. So we had a couple guys all together with different light sources coming in, and we all had to plug them in at the same time and then unplug them at the same time. It was just really kind of a pain. Using this emulsion, you can actually underexpose a little bit and overexpose a little bit, and it's going to be fine. Your exposure latitudes are going to be a little bit longer, like your exposure times. However, your screens are going to come out better. It's going to be easier product to work with, and we really recommend, especially for the beginners, and if you're not doing over 10 screens a day, this product works really good. It's a little bit cheaper, and it also is much, much more user-friendly. So you always want to use, until you get to be a big shop and have a very high powerful exposure unit, so you can expose the pre-sensitized emulsion and you can really calculate down and pinpoint your exposure times. You're always going to want to use a dual cure emulsion. Last product in this kit is just your spray adhesive. We'll talk about that later on the screen press itself. It actually what holds your t-shirts or your printing pallets or whatever you're printing down to the press so it doesn't move during the printing process. Something that doesn't come with your kit is like a glass cleaner. We sell a spray away glass cleaner. You're always going to want to make sure that your exposure unit or your exposure glass is clean, free of dust. A lot of times it'll get stuck emulsion on there. If you get any particles on that glass or any stains on that glass, it's going to come through on your screen. It's going to expose and leave a mark on your screen when you're exposing. So you always want to make sure to have a glass cleaner on hand so you have very, very clean surfaces to work with. You also want to make sure that you have paper towels, just to clean up messes, clean scoop coaters, and that is the next thing we're going to talk about. This is a scoop coater. This is what coats your emulsion onto your screen. Now, there are a couple different types of scoop coaters. This is a dual edge scoop coater, so it has two coating edges. It has a thin coating edge and it has a thick coating edge. The thin coating edge will put a very, very fine, smooth line on your screen. The thick edge will put much more emulsion on the screen, so that if you're doing like you want a very high density print, or you're doing maybe sometimes using heat transfers, which we'll talk about later, you use the thick edge. Most of the time for doing t-shirts and pretty much anything, you're going to use the thin or the sharp edge. This is the other type of scoop coater. It just has one sharp edge. So instead of having a sharp and a dull edge or a thin and a thick edge, this one just has one. It holds much less emulsion, and it's a little bit harder to hold in your hands. We definitely would recommend going with a dual edge scoop coater. They're actually much more effective. They hold more emulsion. They're going to last longer. It's nice because you can take the caps off and you can scrape out the emulsion so you don't waste any emulsion, and they're really easy to clean. These are all the basic products in our chemical starter kit, and most of the kits that we sell have these products in them for your screen preparation, exposure, and cleanup. A couple things I also wanted to touch on before we moved on and actually started showing some of these processes is that for different types of printing, different applications, and different types of inks, you're going to be using different types of emulsion. Now this emulsion, this is our DXP emulsion, it's going to be used for all your basic textile printing, all your plastisol inks. This is what you're going to use. If you're going to use water-based inks clean with water. So this is semi-water resistant, but if you're cleaning a lot of screens with water instead of using the 147, which is used with plastisol inks, it's actually going to break down you're going to lose your image. So we have a water-resistant emulsion that you're going to want to use if you're going to be using water-based inks. We definitely would recommend using plastisol inks. They're better to work with. They're more industrial grade. They last longer on the t-shirt, but some people have to use water-based inks for certain types of printing. So if you're going to be using water-based inks, you're going to want to use a water-based or water-safe emulsion. If you are using graphic inks, which we'll talk about later, if you're printing signs or stickers or on glass, metal, wood, you're going to want to use a graphic emulsion. Graphic inks have a lot stronger cleaners and they clean a lot different. So you're going to want to use a more solvent resistant emulsion so that this emulsion will actually work somewhat if you're doing just a couple signs, but if you're printing a lot of signs through this emulsion, it's going to break down. So you're going to want to use a graphic emulsion if you are printing graphic inks. This is called our DCM emulsion. The DCM emulsion is actually a very good emulsion. It's also a dual cure emulsion, and it will work for graphic inks, and it will also work for textile inks. So if you're going to be printing both textile and graphic stuff, you're going to probably want to use this emulsion over the DXP because it's more versatile. Well, a couple more things about what you'll need in your darkroom. You're gonna want a forced air fan. Just a forced air fan. You can get one like this, or you can just get a box fan, get a big shop fan. This is what's going to be used to dry your screens. You're also going to want to make sure that your darkroom is very, very dust free. Now you don't want your darkroom to be in a shop where it has all dust coming in, because those dust particles will get in your screen, they'll create pinholes, they'll create marks on your screen, they'll get in your emulsion, and it'll just be a pain. So you want to make sure that your darkroom is cut off from all dust and like dirt and whatnot. You want to make sure it's very, very clean. Now there are just a few more things I want to talk to you guys about before we move on, and this is going to deal with your setting up your darkroom in different parts of the country. This is dealing with humidity control. Now emulsion is a water-based product, so it's almost 60-70% water. That means if you're in a very humid part of the country, when you're trying to dry your screens, the water needs to evaporate out of those screens. So if you're like in Arizona or California, or maybe up in the Midwest where it's not that humid, the North Midwest, your screens are going to dry very, very well because the water is going to evaporate quickly and fast out of the emulsion. Now if you're in a very, very wet part of the country, if you're a very humid part of the country like the South or maybe the Northwest, you might have some problems drying your screens. You might, even though you're drying your screens overnight, we would recommend drying your screens at least 6 hours. But if you're in a very humid part of the country, you'll come out after 6 hours and you're still going to feel that screen's very tacky. It still has a lot of emulsion and water left in it. So we're going to want to maybe get a dehumidifier for your darkroom so that you keep your darkroom very, very dry. Your darkroom also likes to be a little bit warm, a little bit hot, but it has to be a dry hot. It cannot be a wet hot. So to cover that again, if you're in a humid part of the country, you're going to want to get a dehumidifier for your darkroom if possible, or if you don't have access to a dehumidifier, you're at least going to want to get a forced air fan, maybe a little heater to go with that. And it might take a little bit longer to dry those screens if you don't have a dehumidifier. In the dry parts of the country, you're probably not going to need to worry about it, but you also don't want your screen room to be in your darkroom to get too hot. If it's like 120 degrees sitting out in the garage, it's going to bake that emulsion. You're not going to want that. So you want your darkroom to be between probably 70 and 80 degrees, and you want it to be very, very dry climate inside that darkroom. One more thing that I want to disclaim before we start is that we're going to be filming this whole darkroom process in the light so you guys can see what's going on. We're going to show you briefly right now what you want your darkroom to look like. So we're going to turn off the lights and just talk very, very briefly, and that'll give you guys an idea of actually how you want your darkroom to look. But for your reference, this whole process we're going to be filming in the light. So we're actually not going to be light safe, but we have to do it that way so we can show you how to do it. Okay, now we are in the light safe and darkroom environment. In this particular darkroom, we have one window, and over that window, it's behind the camera so you can't see it. You'll probably see it later on in the shoot, but it has the amber lith over that to block out all the UV rays. We also have two light safe bulbs, one behind the camera and one right here in just this desk lamp stand. There's 60 watt light safe bulbs. You can see that you can definitely see what's going on in this darkroom, but right now we're 100% light safe. One thing that I also want to show you guys that I couldn't show you earlier because we weren't in a light safe environment is you guys want to get or want to build a screen drying rack. Now this is very, very handy to have in your darkroom. It saves space. It allows your screens to dry properly. This is one that we sell. It runs about $170. Holds 16 screens. Just slide them in and out. Very, very handy to have in your darkroom. Saves a lot of space. Very, very nice to let your screens dry in a screen drying rack. You can also build them. They're fairly easy to build as well. One thing you want to have for your drying rack and also in your darkroom is you want to have your ability to cover this drying rack and cover this screen rack so that if you have to turn the lights on in your room or if you're washing screens out and getting water over the place, your screens that are drying or that are still need to be light safe because they haven't been exposed can be that way. So you just want to get like a black sheet, a heavy black sheet or a black tarp to cover your drying rack so you can turn your lights on in your darkroom, you can wash out screens, you can turn your exposure unit on, and that's going to protect the unexposed screens in your drying rack. You can also use very, very heavy black trash bags to put your screens in, so you can pre-coat dozens of screens at a time, so you're not having to go coat screens and let them dry. You can pre-coat and dry. You can fill this whole rack up with unexposed screens and let them sit for about 2 to 3 weeks. So that way you're not having to do that every time you go to expose a screen. Once you need a screen to expose, you can just pull a screen out of the drying rack and go expose it on your exposure unit. So, but for that you're going to want something, either black trash bags to put the screens in or a big sheet or canvas, something black to cover your drying rack so that you keep those screens safe and free of UV light. Now that we've talked about this darkroom process, we're going to go in and actually show you guys the processes and how to do them hands-on in this DVD. The first part in the screen preparation process, and one of the most important, is screen degreasing. Now once you've got your screen out of your box or out of your shipping container, however you got them, and even if you're reclaimed the job and you're using the screen to set up another job on, you're always going to want to degrease this. Degreasing gets all the contaminants off the screen so the emulsion, once you put the emulsion on, can bond to the screen properly. It's a fairly simple and fast process to do. What you want to do is you want to take your pressure washer or your hose and get the screen wet. Then with your screen degreaser or neutralizer, that's the product that we sell, you want to come and just spray that over the screen. Now we have a backlit washout sink, but this process does not necessarily have to have a backlit washout booth. We're just going to turn it on so we can see what we're doing a little bit better for your guys' sake. Then we're going to want to take our scrub pad that's labeled degreaser, and we're going to want to come, we're going to get a little wet first, then come in and just work in the degreaser to the screen. Make sure we get all the contaminants out of the screen. You want to start on the outside, and then you want to move to the inside. And you can tell when it's worked in when it starts to lather up. Once it's worked in, you want to take your pressure washer once again and start on the back of it. Start from top, head towards bottom. Then move to the front of it. You really want to make sure that you get all the soap out of this screen. If you leave soap in this screen, your emulsion is definitely not going to bond properly and your screen is going to wash out in areas you don't want it to wash out at. Once you see that you clearly washed away all the soap particles, you're just going to give the screen a good tap to get the water out of it. That can be done, just gets most of the water out of it. And you're going to want to come put it in front of a fan or in your drying rack to dry. Okay, right now we're going to show you how to mix properly your dual cure and diazo emulsion. Now there are many different brands of emulsion, so you're going to want to read those emulsion instructions very carefully so that you know how to mix properly for the brand that you're using. The brand that we use is CCI, Chemical Consultants Incorporated, and this emulsion that we're going to be mixing today is DXP. It's the most user-friendly emulsion. It's the one we definitely recommend for all you beginners. Okay, basically with this emulsion, this is your bottle of diazo. Now it's a very fine powder in this bottle right now, so you always want to make sure to keep this cap on until you mix this with water. Otherwise this diazo will go everywhere and you won't get a proper content and mixture ratio with your emulsion. You want to mix this halfway with distilled water. So we're just going to pour water in. Until it gets to the halfway mark. Then you want to put your cap back on. Then you want to shake it around probably for about a minute to maybe 2 minutes. You want to make sure that you get all that powder mixed in with the water. So we're just shaking around here. Once this is shaken properly, once again you want to do it for about a minute to 2 minutes. We're going to come and we're going to open our emulsion. Remember, this is all done in a light safe environment with your light safe yellow bulbs or your amberlith on the windows, because we're doing this right now in the lit environment, but you would be doing this process in the light safe environment. Just going to want to open the emulsion. Most emulsions will come with the stir stick. See this content of emulsion right here? This is all unsensitized emulsion. So we're going to want to take this on the inside of the cap and scrape it into the container of emulsion, because if we put this cap back on and we don't scrape this in, it's going to drop unsensitized emulsion into the sensitized emulsion. So we're going to scrape that off, scrape that all in the container. Get as much off as we can so that we do not get any drips. Once that's done, we're going to take our diazo and dump it in to the emulsion. Now the diazo is a very, very yellow stain look to it, so you'll get on your fingers, you'll see the yellow stain. Even after when you expose your screen, you'll see yellow in the emulsion. That's your diazo. Now once that's in, we want to start mixing slowly and mix in the diazo to the emulsion. Now, depending what brand you're using, depending what kind of emulsion you're using, many different emulsions have different colors. This particular color is pink. And once we mix the diazo, because the diazo is so yellow in content, it's going to turn like an orangish color. However, after it's exposed and dried on your screen, it's going to look more pinkish again. So you're going to want to mix this. You're going to definitely want to take your time, get all the edges mixed over, get all the unsensitized emulsion off the edges, mix in the emulsion very, very good. This process usually takes roughly, I would say, mixing a good amount of emulsion, probably 5 minutes. Because you definitely want to get all the diazo mixed in, so you don't see how there's streaks in the emulsion right now. You don't want to see any streaks. You want it to be all solid in color. So that's going to take a little bit of time to mix. We're getting the bottom of the can. You want to make sure to get the bottom of the can, bring the bottom unsensitized emulsion up to the top so you can mix it in. You can see the emulsion start to conform more to the color. You're definitely going to want to keep going until you see no streaks whatsoever in it at all. See, it's coming together better now, but we're not done. We're not probably even close to being done. Looking better yet. So again, getting all the emulsion off the sides. Okay, now we're pretty much close to being done. We're going to just stir it for a couple more minutes here just to make sure we get everything. But you can definitely see that you see no more streak marks at all in the emulsion. It's all one uniform color. Sometimes there gets to be diazo or diazo residue left on the top side, so you want to make sure to scrape that all off. Once this emulsion is mixed, you do not have to mix it anymore. It will be mixed for the life of the emulsion. So you only need to mix the emulsion once. That's why we want to make sure to mix it very, very good the first time. Once mixed, scrape off your stir stick. Make sure that your emulsion is all uniform in color. You cannot see any diazo streaks in there whatsoever. Put your stir stick to the side. Then we're going to want to come and see, if you see the emulsion right now, it has bubbles in it. Those are air bubbles from us mixing in the emulsion. We want to make sure that all those bubbles get out of the emulsion before we put it on our screen. So you're going to want to let the emulsion probably sit overnight. If you can't afford to let it sit overnight, probably at least 2 to 4 hours. Probably along the edge of 4 hours, I would recommend. So you want to, don't put the cap on all the way. You want to just put the cap on like this to give the emulsion a little bit room to breathe and let those air bubbles evaporate out. And then you're going to want to store this in a light, safe environment, of course. And once all those air bubbles are evaporated out, then we can then go and start using this emulsion. If you're not going to be going through a lot of emulsion, one good idea to do is to take a Sharpie marker and just mark what the date that you mixed this emulsion. That way, if it's getting to be old, like 5 or 6 months down the road, you can actually go back and see the date that you mixed it. So once it's past 5 months, you're going to probably not get very good exposure results. That's because the emulsion is getting old and it's past its shelf life. Now that our screens are degreased and dry, we're going to go over the emulsion coating process. However, before we go over this process, I first want to share with you guys the different types of screens and the different kinds of screen meshes and mesh sizes, and to kind of go over what can be used for what applications, so you guys know a little bit about that. First of all, there are two types of frames for the screens. There are wood frames and there are aluminum frames. Now, wood frames, they've been around a lot longer than aluminum. They hold up very, very well. They're very strong. However, there's a couple of disadvantages to wood frames. The advantage to them is they're usually cheaper, and you can usually buy more of them. They're more readily available sometimes from certain companies, and a lot of shops have a lot of wood frames. Me personally, I love using wood frames. I like buying the cheaper frame, so I've always used wood versus aluminum. However, they have a little bit of disadvantages. If you're soaking them in a lot of water, wood has the tendency to warp a little bit. So once your screen is warped, it's not going to sit flat on your exposure unit or flat on your screen press, and you'll have a hard time using that screen. Also, they cannot be stretched, restretched that easily. Now, the screen mesh is stretched across the screen using a glue adhesive. It's usually a two-part activator that uses to glue the mesh to either the wood or the aluminum. It's stretched very, very tightly by automatic machines, so that if you feel a screen and feel the tension of a screen, how tight the screen is called on the actual frame is called tension. And that's measured in what a measurement unit called newtons. The only way you can measure that is to have a tension meter, however, but you usually want your screen tension when you get them at first. They're probably going to be around between 20 and 24, depending on the mesh size. But you can definitely feel a tight screen, and then as you start doing a lot of printing impressions, as the screen starts to get older and that mesh starts to get used quite a bit, you'll start to be able to poke, and you'll start to feel a lot more give in the screen mesh. When that screen mesh starts to give a lot, your screen's going to be to the end of its life range. You can still use the screen for like your one color jobs. However, if you're using the screen for your multiple color jobs, it's not going to register properly because that mesh is going to actually move when you pull the squeegee across it. So you want to keep, for your multiple color jobs, you want to always have very, very tight tension screens. Now, a couple advantages to the aluminum frame is that they will not warp in water, and you can send them back to the screen manufacturer. We also do that, that's part of our services, to get restretched. So let's say you pop a hole in your screen when you're moving it around and you ruin it, or if you apply too much pressure, or after a couple thousand imprints the screen's going to tend to rip because it just gets old and worn out. You can save screens up, maybe 6 to 12 of them at a time, and send them back to us, and they can be restretched for less than half the cost of the initial frame. So, and that also depends on mesh size, which we'll talk about next. But aluminum frames are good to have if you're going to be using them for a long period of time. The wood, cheaper, great to have for short jobs, longer run jobs. If you're going to be doing a screen and it's going to be printed over and over again, you're going to rinse it out and keep it categorized. It's going to be great for wood because you're not going to have to keep rinsing that out and being exposed to water. Wood's going to work great for that job. However, you're going to be using the screen for a lot of different designs. Maybe you want to go with aluminum. Now we're going to talk about screen mesh size. Now, you'll notice that when you go on our website or go look at a screen manufacturer, they talk about different screen mesh sizes. Now, your typical standard screen mesh size starts at 110. That means there's 110 threads, they're cross threads, one going that way, one going this way, per square inch. A 110 mesh is a fairly open mesh, so that this screen here is a 230 mesh. That means they're a lot finer threads and they're a lot closer together. 230 threads through square inch. Now, if you're doing your basic text design, basic logos, basic cartoon drawings, 110 mesh is pretty much your standard screen. You might want to go up to a 155 mesh if you're getting a little bit higher detail. But 110 mesh to 155 is what you're going to use for all your text stuff, all your logos, everything like that. All your flash plates as well. Now your higher mesh, 200, 230, 305, they're used for very, very fine detail or printing on halftones. Like a 230 or 305 is used for printing on halftones or fine detail. This mesh is also, if you notice, it's yellow. Now a yellow mesh exposes better to the screen. A white mesh doesn't expose as good. That's why you'll find white mesh, the kind of screens that we sell, the white mesh are always the lower meshes. Now, let me explain that to you guys. When you expose this or expose this to light, a white mesh, the white threads actually act as transmitters to the light. So they'll bring light from this end of the screen to this end of the screen by once the exposure, like the exposure part of the screen will actually transmit light through the fibers. The yellow mesh blocks that light transmission. So when you're exposing it, you're not going to get light running through your screen. So if you're exposing really fine detail, that's why we sell all the higher meshes, because higher meshes are used for fine detail. We always sell them in yellow or orange mesh. Most of the time it's yellow mesh. But when you're exposing big block images or exposing text or cartoons with a white mesh, it doesn't matter if you get a little bit of light running through the screen because you're not exposing fine detail anyway. And it's very, very small amount of light, so it's only going to matter when you're exposing very, very fine detail. That's why, once again, all the higher meshes are yellow mesh. One more thing that I also like to talk about with a mesh is the type of ink you're using. If you're using a textile ink like a plastisol ink or a white ink, you're going to want to use the 110 to 155 mesh, especially with the white ink with the white flash plates, which we're going to show later on in the video. However, if you're using like maybe a graphic ink or a process ink, the ink's usually a lot thinner. So you might want to use a higher mesh so it will allow less ink to pass through the screen mesh. Because if you use a really thin ink with a 110 mesh, it's just going to drop through design. It's going to flood onto your t-shirt. So you want to use a higher mesh with the graphic inks, like if you're printing signs or stickers or anything like that. And if you're printing process prints, obviously the process ink's going to be much, much thinner. And once again, if you guys want to learn more about how to print process, I definitely would recommend the Intro to Process DVD that we sell on our website, because that goes over all of this. If you know something is not making sense to you, that DVD is going to cover it on how to process print, which is printing a full color image using the high mesh 305 screens. There's lower meshes as well, like 81, 60, 40 mesh. Those meshes are very, very open, and they're used for printing, like an 81 mesh is used for printing high density. If you really, really want a thick layer of white or a thick layer of black on the t-shirt, you would use maybe a 81 mesh. If you want to print with glitters or shimmers are usually printed through the 81 mesh. Now the big glitter particles, the glitter inks, you have to usually print those through a 40 mesh or a 60 mesh. So there's different types of mesh for different reasons. You're going to want to research this a little bit on your own, read about that. You can find information on our website, silkscreeningsupplies.com. You can get books. How to Print Shirts for Fun and Profit is a really good book. It talks about mesh sizes, talks about micron fibers. This DVD, I just wanted to basically cover the basics of the screen mesh, what uses for what type of printing, and tell you a little bit about the difference between the wood and the aluminum screens. So now that we've talked about that, we're going to go ahead and show the coating process, different coating techniques to how to coat the emulsion onto the screen. Now we're going to cover the emulsion coating process. Once again, let me reiterate, this is done in the light safe room with your light safe yellow bulb. You do not want to do this in full light. That's why we're doing it right now, so you can see what we're doing on the video. So just take your cap off your emulsion. And then we're using the dual edge scoop coater. And you want to fill the scoop coater about halfway full. And it also depends on how many screens you're doing. If you're doing a lot of screens, you're going to want to fill it fuller, so you're going to have to fill it less throughout the coating process. But basically, you want to make sure that it's about halfway full and that you have an even reservoir of emulsion in the screen. So we're going to set it on the table, maybe let it sit for a couple seconds so it gets even, so it's not one edge of the scoop coater is not full of emulsion, the other edge is left empty. One thing about your scoop coater is that the edge is very, very critical. If you're not very careful, most of them come with caps. You want to keep the caps on at all times when they're not being used, because if you scratch this up, if you scratch the edge or if it gets dinged at all, it's going to leave lines in your screens that you're not going to want. You want a very, very, very smooth coating edge. One thing that you're also going to want in this process is some type of block or 2x4. Now this can be done on a table or on the floor. I learned pretty much doing it on the floor, but using a table like this works a lot better because it saves your back. So I'm going to show you how to set the screen up for proper coating right now. You're going to want to take this block, put it against a wall or flat surface. Then you want to have your screen sit up snug against this at about this probably 85-degree angle. Now this is going to give, if you press on the screen, it's not going to give or move around at all, because you want to be able to put a fair amount of pressure on the screen when you're coating it. And that the pressure gives it the thin coat that will give you your fine, crisp images. A lot of people are too scared to put pressure on the screen, so they'll coat it and use a ton of emulsion. A quart of emulsion should probably go between 25 and 30 screens, and maybe up to 35 if you're using a lot of higher mesh, because the higher mesh holds less emulsion because it's thinner, it has much more finer detail, so it holds a lot less emulsion than the 110 mesh. This is a 110 mesh that we're using right now. So it holds more emulsion because it has bigger holes. The finer mesh will hold less emulsion, and that's also going to affect your exposure time, which we're going to talk about later. So once again, to reiterate, we're going to want to give the screen, when we go to coat it, a good amount of pressure with our arms and our scoop coater. You don't want to not put pressure on it, because then you'll put too much emulsion on your screen and you'll have hard times exposing it. You're going to want to grab the scoop coater in your hands like this. Use two hands. That way you get a good even coat. Then you're going to want to come over to your screen, start at the bottom of the screen, and tip the scoop coater up. If you notice, this scoop coater has different angles on the caps here. So the first step is to tip the scoop coater up all the way to the screen. So we're going to tip it up all the way till that angle meets. That's going to bring the emulsion and give it a line, a beaded line across the screen right here. So once I see that line hit the screen, all that emulsion, I'm going to tilt the scoop coater back just a little bit so we're not facing it all the way up, it's tilted back, and then I'm going to get a good amount of pressure, and I'm going to bring it up about 1 inch from the top. I'm going to tilt the scoop coater back so it lets all the emulsion ride back into the scoop coater. Then I'm going to clean the edge of the screen so I get a good and nice print on top. Now you always want to start printing with the flat side of the screen or the shirt side or the print side of the screen, because we'll explain this more later, but you want your emulsion to settle on this side of the screen. So we coat this side of the screen first and the inside second. Now most of the time you're going to use a one coat method. If there's different types of printing, more advanced printings, which you can read about in that book, How to Print Shirts for Fun and Profit, that use different coating methods, maybe 2-2. You can coat the screen, let it dry, coat it again, let it dry, coat it again. For high density printing, if you really want a thick stencil so you get a very thick amount of ink on the screen. But for most of the stuff you're going to do, you want to coat one time on the outside and then one time on the inside. Coating on the inside second is going to leave a nice layer, smooth layer, a thicker layer of the emulsion on the outside of the screen. That emulsion on the outside of the screen or the flat side of the screen is actually, once your image is exposed in it, is going to give the printing surface and the printing image an actual gasket. So it leaves a very, very smooth print. That's how you get your smooth, fine, crisp prints on your shirt or your sign or whatever you're printing. So we coated the outside. We're going to come in and do the same process on the inside. Make sure our screen's nice and snug in the back. Take our scoop coater, 2 hands snug. Bring it up to the screen. Let the emulsion roll onto the screen mesh. Tilt the scoop coater back. Good amount of pressure. Bring the scoop coater up about 1 inch from the top. Roll it back so the emulsion rolls back into the scoop coater and clear it off. Now our screen is coated. If you noticed here, there always will be lines on the edge and bottom and top. Now you can take some type of paper towel or something like that and wipe those lines off, because especially if you're newer at exposing or at coating, your lines are going to be much, much thicker. So if you're drawing a whole bunch of screens, which we're going to talk about how to dry them in a second, if you're drawing a whole bunch of screens, this emulsion is going to drip down and get on other screens. So you want to make sure that you can wipe these off just with a paper towel or something like that. And you're going to mess the edges up of the emulsion, but that's okay, because usually your critical part of the emulsion is in the center where your image is going to be anyway. So now we're going to talk about how to set the screen up to dry. Once the screen is coated, remember we talked about you want your emulsion to settle on the outside or the flat side, printing side of the screen. So we also want to let it dry like this. This way, gravity will take the emulsion and bring it to the outside of the screen more than it already is. So you can take some blocks, like just wooden blocks, and set them up like this. Put a block on this side to hold the screen flat like that, like so. And that way they'll let the screen dry. Or what works much, much better, much easier, is actually using the drying cabinet that we showed a little bit earlier. We'll bring the drying cabinet over and bring our screen in, and then just set it in to the bottom or the middle of the drying rack upside down once again. Now the rack's nice because it's already pre-measured. You don't get the block stuck on your screen. Sometimes if the block gets stuck on part of the emulsion, it's going to stick onto the screen. You're going to have to peel it off. It's going to wreck some of your emulsion. So drying rack works really nice. Then you're going to take your fan, bring it over to the drying rack. Once again, it dries in a light safe room or a dark room. And just turn it on. And that's going to let air circulate through your screen drying rack and let the water evaporate out of the emulsion, as we were talking about before. So that's pretty much how you coat a screen. I'm going to show you one more time how to coat the screen up close so you can actually see the emulsion going onto the screen. Okay, to show it close up now, take the scoop coater with both hands, Put it firmly against the bottom of the screen. You want to tilt it up so that it hits that mark, and see that emulsion bead hit the screen. Once that bead's all the way across the screen, we just tilt the scoop coater back a little bit like so and bring it all the way up. You want to use a good amount of pressure. Don't be afraid to push a little bit hard on the screen. Tilt it back once you get about 1 inch from the top, and just clean the screen off like that. Now we're going to do the same thing on the inside of the screen. Now the inside of the screen is a little bit more tricky to get to the bottom of it. You have to dip the scoop cutter a little bit like so, and then it brings the emulsion bead onto the screen. Then we bring it up about 1 inch from the top, roll it back, clean it up. Now we can wipe the edges of our screen if we want, and then put our screen in the drying rack to dry. Once we're done using our scoop coater to coat the screens, there's usually going to be leftover emulsion in the bottom of the scoop coater. We just simply take one of the end caps off and pour the rest back into the container. You can use like a plastic glove or a wood stick. Just make sure if it's a wood stick it doesn't have any particles in it. Just pour it all the way back into the container so that we're not wasting any emulsion. Once again, this is done in a light, safe room. Okay, once all the main part of the emulsion is back in the container, we put the cap back on. We snug it down and lock it into place. You want to store this emulsion in a cool, dark room. You want to spray a little bit of emulsion remover in this scoop coater while it looks like this state once you've scraped all the emulsion back into the container. And then you want to take your water or your pressure washer and rinse it all out so that the only thing you have left is very, very clean, wet aluminum scoop coater. Once it's wet, you want to dry it off with a soft towel or paper towel and let it air dry for a couple minutes. Then you want to put the cap back on it. So you want to rinse all this out with water or your pressure washer, let it dry, and then put the cap back on it. That's pretty much all on the coating process and how to clean up a scoop coater. Now we're going to move in to exposing your screens and setting up your screens for exposure.